I won't waste time on fancy intros, as I'm not only going to make one complex thesis statement today, but two. In simple terms, I'm going to A. pose to you the idea that feudalism, by which I mean a system of autocratic rule by a minority of militarized elites over a population of perpetually indentured serfs, wherein socioeconomic positioning is hereditarily locked and mobility is most strongly determined by one's social connections than their individual competence, is not merely endemic to human civilization, but is in fact its default state, into which every other system inevitably either evolves or devolves. And B. I'm going to lay out an argument for why dynastic rule and hereditary caste systems aren't the inherent personifications of evil we've all been taught to see them as. Now, to be very clear right out of the gate, I'm not saying that we should strive to revert to these systems, or that they're inherently better than all others. After all, modern medicine and microwave ovens aren't natural either, but nobody's suggesting we should go back to drinking mercury for syphilis or rubbing sticks together to cook dinner. But, as a man much wiser than myself famously said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And the trade-off to defying the natural order was, and is always going to be a quick and messy end. And remember, nature is immoral. It has no right or wrong, no good or evil. It knows only actions and consequences. And it is one of the more resilient sets of causal chains which I'll be examining here. Not convention, not some abstract notions of virtue, just pure animalistic incentives and some of their consequences. At least so far as I understand them. Now, as for my primary theory that feudalism is the default socio-political resting position, I've already covered it in various parts elsewhere on this channel. Although those videos are some of the first ones I ever posted, so I can't blame anyone new for missing out on them. To be very brief, it all comes down to what I'm going to call the 4 fundamental motivators. Just as how the 4 fundamental forces, the strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetism and gravity, determine every physical interaction in the universe, and the 4 logical constants of causality, locality, symmetry, and objectivity describe all possible patterns within any given denomination of space-time. The 4 fundamental motivators, efficiency, reproduction, pleasure-seeking, and pain avoidance, describe every single form of behavior and individual action ever committed by any creature that can be said to have intelligence. Again, I've talked about these elsewhere, so I'm not going to bog us down with heavy explanations. But I've said it before, and I'll keep harping on it until it either stops being true, or until the cows all learn to code and set up colonies on Mars. People are motivated principally by incentives, not narratives. What they think, what they feel, what they believe, even what's actually empirically correct, does not matter. All that matters is what they want, and what all they're prepared to do, what they're prepared to risk, how far they're prepared to go, and what all they're prepared to sacrifice in order to get it. Burn this fact into your brains. You will never understand the things people do until you understand the things they want. Desire predicts behavior, not beliefs. Now, let us consider the incentives and motivations of the average person, shall we? First and foremost, at the end of the day, all humans adhere to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This much is self-evident and self-explanatory. But beyond it, and often criminally overlooked in our modern culture, we are also irrevocably social animals. We judge ourselves, our worth, our efficacy, and we get the plurality of our beliefs handed down to us from other people. And therefore, the operative factor in our being able to satisfy our own needs and desires is power, which just means the ability to do. And as the main power in our world is social leverage, the main way in which we acquire power is by climbing the social ladder, and the main way we do that is through gaining status within a structural hierarchy, which we primarily do by being a magnet of success. I.e., we have something of value that everyone around us wants access to and can't simply take by force, at least not without incurring significant negative consequences. This requires then an intricate and highly sophisticated network of codependent bartering, which all totaled form the scaffolding on which all our social, legal, cultural, and moral orders are built. Basically, people want things from each other. They set up a system by which they can exchange the value they have for the value they want/need, and society/civilization ensues. And the original currency of this primitive social economy is not money, but relationships. The primary currency amongst them is respect, and the primary token of exchanging such is status. I won't go into detail on how exactly these status games play out, as they're not wholly relevant to my overarching point, and I've also already done so in as much detail as I'm comfortable asserting elsewhere. But I do need you to understand that they exist and are endemic to our condition, both as life forms and as humans, in order for anything else I say going forward to make any sense. Basically, I need you to understand, and for the sake of argument accept as fact, that every human is ultimately concerned with their own market value and not the overall well-being of the systems they play a part in, just as how the wolves and the deer care nothing for the well-being of the forest. Each is just concerned with their own survival, and were they to somehow gain sentience, would predominantly be occupied with advancing to a higher and less vulnerable spot on the food chain. In other words, they care only about what the group, the herd, the pack, the tribe, the town, the country, etc., can do for them and the people they personally depend on, not the other way around. The key point of my argument that must be hammered home is this. Status is not a commodity, meaning it has no value in and of itself. It's a currency. It's the token of respect, which is the currency of all relationships, given as a sign of deference, of dependence, and of subordination. In our modern culture, we think that status should naturally be attributed to merit, that is, based on objective, tangible contributions to the group. This is false. Status comes by way of having authority over others, which comes through making their success contingent upon yours. The issue is that this is all based around perception. There's a whole battery of ways you can trick someone into thinking they need you more than they really do, or that you're more of a threat than you really are. And thereby you can win greater favors by gaming the system than by actually playing and winning the game. But as I've said in other videos, you can't force or negotiate desire. No amount of threat or gaslighting is going to convince people they want something when they don't. Thus, the actual measure of a person's status, which is their place in the pecking order of a given group, be it a club, a tribe, a business, an army, a kingdom, a religion, etc., is how much flexibility they have within it and how much leeway they get from those around them. I.e., someone of higher status can get away with more, can bend or break the rules without penalty, can make overt demands of others, and overall has a much greater margin for error, meaning they can afford to take more risks and can absorb more losses than someone of lower status can. In other words, the more status you have, the more people are inclined to help and or tolerate you. This is why you tend to see a lot of low-status people, particularly men, flagrantly disregarding social conventions or manners. In essence, they're trying to give off the impression of being higher status than they are by being assholes, since being an asshole and still having a full set of teeth is usually the exclusive privilege of the powerful. So now we understand what status is and why everybody wants it. But what does that have to do with the caste system? Well, as I've also stated in another video, competence and ambition are two entirely different qualities. You can be the smartest person ever born, but if you're content with being the assistant manager at Costco, you're never going to rise beyond that station. We can see this if we examine the upper echelons of our own society. Up past a certain point, that being around the low six-figure range, we see that intelligence and competence actually has less to do with an individual's material success than does luck and circumstance. Basically, the people at the very tippy-top of the modern hierarchy are there not because they were just that much smarter or worked that many times harder than everyone else, as much as they'd like you to think that, but because they were simply in the right place at the right time and were just smart enough to take full advantage of it. Which doesn't mean they're not smart or competent, just that they're not the omnicompetent genius polymaths they want us all to believe they are, and that indeed you would need to be to single-handedly steer a ship with as many moving parts as the modern industrialized world has under its ever-expanding belt. And herein lies the crux of my argument. Again, I need to stress, I'm not saying we should go full medieval, or that these older systems were perfect in any way, shape, or form. My point is only that there's a reason we, as a species, keep finding our way back to this mold, and that this reason is worth investigating and understanding if we are to have any hope of arresting its insidious momentum for good. And to do that, we need to first understand the intrinsic flaws in our current, liberal, post-industrial socio-economic order. And that, I believe, is the democratization of labor. Put simply, I believe the concept of infinite social mobility, the idea that anyone from any stage in the socio-economic pyramid can, through the force of their own will and efforts alone, propel themselves into any other level, stage, or station of their choosing, is actually what's caused the onset of class warfare to begin with, which you'll notice we didn't really see in the centuries preceding the Industrial Revolution. Why? After all, the main advantage of breaking the glass ceiling is that the competent people rise to where they'd be most optimally exploited. I mean, be best positioned to advance society to the betterment of their fellow man. Totally. But having strict rules and limitations is essential for the continued health and vitality of any game. That's why ranked matches in online games exist. to stop veteran players from griefing the newbies at the expense of the latter's ability to enjoy the experience. The even bigger problem is that, in order for some to win, others have to lose. That's how competition works, and in any contest, there's always going to be more losers than winners. And remember, humans are a social species, meaning people care considerably more about status than they do about material riches, as the latter didn't really exist when our Matrix blueprints were being drafted. And once you have enough wealth to where your material needs and comforts are assured, the focus for acquisitive sorts becomes not on the money itself, but on the status that having a bigger number gives them. Much like how gamers compete to beat each other's high scores, even though the points difference offers them no material advantage. The problem this causes is people all wanting to get into whatever field holds the most prestige, while also providing for a comfortable lifestyle. This, in the 21st century, leads people to pursue jobs in the white-collar fields at the expense of blue-collar trades, which are more essential to the raw function of society. But no man wants to volunteer to be lower status, even if the money's the same. And this is where the caste system steps in. By simply disallowing people to move beyond the professional fence into which they were born, you force those with competence to adapt to their situation rather than taking the easy way out and grifting their way up the ranks. Granted, this isn't wholly feasible in the modern era, what with the accessibility of education effectively dismantling all the old divisions of labor. But this is where my second thesis point comes back up to haunt us. You see, an open market wherein people are free to rise and fall as far as they alone dictate results in the free and open flow of competition up and down the social ladder, rather than just straight across as it did in the bad old days. This puts people of lower rank in direct and open competition with those on the higher rungs, making meritocracy a direct and potent threat to the elite's job security. And since the last thing any of the big club members want is to be knocked off their pedestals by some upstart commoner, this then puts the interests of upper management directly at odds with the idea of meritocracy. So they install artificial limiters in the form of prohibitive bureaucracy and regulations, which only the people chummy with the system, or who possess the requisite funds to hire an army of accountants and lawyers to clear the debris for them, can readily navigate, thus effectively restricting upward mobility once more to only those the elites like and/or can most readily exploit or manipulate. Basically, the overall point I'm trying to make is that when you democratize labor, you democratize competition, and we all know how well democracies work out in the long run. This turns your society from a tense egregious house built out of many cooperative bricks into a solid freestanding pillar, whose top and bottom are perpetually at odds, since they both covet the former's position which they can't both possess. And out of the ashes of the foolish and failed utopia shall emerge the latest iteration of the classical model. Same shit, different century. And with that, here's where I'm going to bid all those who've been kind enough to stick with me this far, adieu. I could go on for at least 20 more minutes, but seeing as how I've already done that elsewhere, and this video's gone past its originally slotted length by a fair margin, I'm going to leave it there for, potentially, another time. Until then, as always, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz if you like where my head is at. Check out my books on Amazon or become a channel member if you want to support me financially. And as always, stay safe, stay sane, and remember the wise words of old King Solomon. What has come before shall come again. What has been before shall be the same. What was old shall be made anew. The way it was done is how it shall be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Peace be upon you.